Hello everyone, this is Serious Trivia, and today we're continuing our Yuan Shu Dynasty of Zhong lore series with part 2, titled Sibling Rivalry. So last time we left off as Yuan Shu took control of the Nanyang commandery with the help of Sun Jian as they joined the Guangdong coalition to stand against the tyrant Dong Zhuo. Now regrettably for Yuan Shu, the leadership of this coalition will eventually fall onto his older brother Yuan Shao. And since Yuan Shu had never thought Yuan Shao to be worthy of their clan name, as Yuan Shao's birth mother was just a maid, this was a difficult pill to swallow. But sadly, it seems fate has always been against him in this regard. First, his uncle, Yuan Cheng, just had to adopt Yuan Shao after being sonless. Then to make matters worse, Yuan Cheng had to die young, leaving behind a second marquis title for Yuan Shao, and the perfect opportunity for Yuan Shao to display filial piety by tomb guarding for 3 years, which not only earned Yuan Shao a great reputation among the gentry clans, but also the opportunity for him to stay out of the political mess in the capital with the eunuchs. And before Yuan Shao would even return to politics by becoming the second in command for the emperor's 8 captains of the West Palace army, he would spend his tomb guarding days openly hosting scholars who were opposed to the eunuchs as a way to demonstrate where his loyalty lied. And it was through this public display during this period that would eventually net him enough goodwill from the other gentry clans to nominate him now as the leader of the coalition against Dong Zhuo, much to the dismay of Yuan Shu. Now thankfully, Yuan Shu did not have to face his brother in person, as Yuan Shao was encamped on the other side of the Yellow River on the northern front of the attack in Henei, while he himself was camped on the borders of the Nanyang commandery in a mountain village at the foothill of Mount Lu, in a place called Luyang. Now speaking of Nanyang commandery, we should take a moment to study the maps in order to better understand why Yuan Shu is here, and more importantly, why he will eventually abandon this populous and lucrative commandery. So here we have a map of the northern tip of the Jian province, where the Nanyang commandery is situated. And if we isolate just Nanyang, we can see that it's a rather large commandery with a very prolonged western tip. And surrounding it to the north is the capital commandery of Henan. Then to its east is the Yu province, where you have the Inchuan commandery and the Runan commandery bordering it. Of course, with the Yuan clan originating from Runan, they and in turn Yuan Shu have great influence and connections in that region. And this is something we'll come back to. For now, let's turn our eyes west towards the Yi province, which borders Nanyang here, and you have the Hanzhong commandery, which is another rather large commandery that's rather mountainous and it's currently a bit unimportant for our discussion here. And finally, to the south, you have the Nan commandery and the Jiangxia commandery, which are both part of the Jian province. So geographically speaking, we have Nanyang sitting right in between the Yellow and the Yangtze rivers, and it hugs the capital of Luyang to the south, which all contribute to why it was an immensely wealthy commandery at this time period, with a population of well over 1 million. But as we mentioned in the last episode, Yuan Shu's control over this commandery was not granted through any government mandate, but rather through a violent uprising, as Sun Jian, who was the administrator of Changsha, had traveled up to the capital city of Wan here in Nanyang, where he killed the current administrator Zhang Zi on Yuan Shu's behalf, in a blatant power grab in the region. Then Sun Jian would continue north to Luyang, where Yuan Shu was in camp with his own small group of Rabbit Tiger guards, as Yuan Shu warmly welcomed Sun Jian into his ranks. And to reward Sun Jian for seizing control of the Nanyang commandery and for killing the prefect of the entire Jian province prior to that, Yuan Shu granted Sun Jian the title of the general who breaks the enemy, and the prefect of the neighboring Yu province. Now to be clear, Yuan Shu had no authority to grant either of these titles, and Sun Jian knew this as well. But you can think of these as promises. For now, as if the coalition did topple Dong Zhuo and retake the court, these promises can be easily fulfilled. Then Yuan Shu left Sun Jian to organize the men in Luyang as they needed time to recruit and muster up their forces, as he himself moved his force into the capital city of Wan, where he was supposed to manage the commandery and provide logistical support for Sun Jian in terms of wages and supplies. Now, I use the term supposed to manage because Yuan Shu is not going to be a great manager of any commandery or provinces, as we will soon learn. And very quickly, with the news of Yuan Shu taking over Nanyang, making its way to the capital, where Dongzhuo was situated, he quickly sent out General Hu Zhen, who had also been named as the administrator of Zhong, to command a cavalry regiment to go and crush Sun Jian's camp at Luyang before they were ready. Now, as you'll quickly learn, many people are given positions and titles that they cannot actually serve during the Three Kingdoms period due to how fractured the government was and how regional powers rose. For example, here, for Hu Zhen, the commandery of Dong is currently firmly in the control of the coalition, as the former administrator, or even you can say the current administrator, Qiao Mao, had been the initial instigator who started this whole coalition with a forged letter. But from Dongzhuo's point of view, now that Qiao Mao had rebelled against the central government or himself, the title can be given away to his own generals as a cheap and intangible reward. But regardless, Hu Zhen rode out for Luyang, expecting an easy victory, as he did not expect these rebels to put up much resistance, as after all, General Xu had recently dealt two crushing defeats to Wang Quan in the northern front and Cao Cao in the eastern front, where both battles almost costed the life of the enemy generals. So riding high on this morale swing, Hu Zhen arrived at Luyang, expecting an easy win. And when he did arrive, Sun Jian was in the middle of hosting a farewell feast for his officer of logistics as he was on his way to travel down to Nanyang to pick up supplies from Yuan Shu. And this feast was placed outside of the encampment, along with the rest of his officer corps, but not many guards. So exposed and in danger, Sun Jian and his group saw the enemy lines form in the horizon, but they did not panic, as he calmly instructed them to continue with the feast, while quietly instructing a few of his officers to slowly filter back to camp and prepare the men to fight. Sensing how cool, calm, and collected Sun Jian was, Hu Zhen hesitated, and by the time that he finally considered launching an attack, it was already too late, as Sun Jian's officers had already been alerted, and the camp was prepared for defense. And sensing his opportunity was closed, Hu Zhen actually decided to retreat, and thus the Battle of Luyang ended without much really any fighting. So having weathered this false raid and the harsh winter of 190, Sun Jian's men, a mixture of veterans from the south that follow Sun Jian up, recruits from Nanyang and the Yu province, collectively set out in the spring of 191 to attack Dongzhuo's forces at a place called Liangdong. Unfortunately for them, Liangdong was heavily defended and led by none other than Xu, who had recently bested Wang Quan and Cao Cao. Outmaneuvered and overwhelmed by the elite Xiliang cavalry regiments, Sun Jian's forces were quickly divided up and routed, as Sun Jian himself was forced to flee for his life with mere 10 riders. Pursued by the enemy cavalry, Sun Jian's friend Zhu Mao offered to take Sun Jian's iconic red turban and wear it himself as he lured the enemy away in order to buy time for Sun Jian's escape. Luckily for both of them, they would both make out of this ordeal alive. Regrouping at the city of Yangren, Sun Jian would spend the next year mustering his forces back to fighting strength. Luckily for him, Dongzhuo spent this year shifting tactics as he chose to opt for strategic retreat back to Chang'an, leaving behind only a small force led once again by the incapable Hu Zhen after Xu was sacked for political reasons. And by 192, when Hu Zhen decided to launch an attack on Yangren, Sun Jian was more than prepared to meet him, as Hu Zhen was not only incapable as a battlefield commander, but also a terrible leader within his own camp, as one of his own lieutenants, Lü Bu, would actually help set up this defeat by providing false information the night before the battle, as he had a grudge against Hu Zhen. And this led directly to a sound defeat and the death of General Hua Xiong, who historically was not a high-ranking general, as Romance of Three Kingdoms would have you believe, but rather just a logistic officer within Dongzhuo's army in charge of moving and guarding military supplies. But nevertheless, the victory at Yangren was the first real victory that the coalition had dealt to Dongzhuo's forces, and Sun Jian's name was now reverberating throughout the country. Even Dongzhuo was impressed, as he sent a delegation led by Li Ru to Sun Jian's camp, offering him a political marriage between the two clans and a blank check for any government post he would want for himself and his fellow clan members. Having known Dongzhuo for quite a time now, from their days serving out west in the Luyang rebellion, Sun Jian was no fan of his, as he turned down the offer and continued his attack on the now abandoned capital of Luyang. But just as his newfound fame made Dongzhuo a fan, it also made Yuan Shu incredibly jealous of his officer, as he suddenly decided to cut off Sun Jian's supplies in order to prevent Sun Jian from seizing any more spotlight and glory. Infuriated and extremely frustrated, Sun Jian wrote immediately for Nanyang, where he was able to convince a slightly embarrassed Yuan Shu about the importance of his continued support and to reassure him of his own loyalty, as they were just days away from retaking the capital, and its credit would be definitely shared among the two of them. And true to his word, Sun Jian would return with supplies and quickly retake Luoyang from a weak defense put up by Lü Bu, as the coalition finally achieved something big. But by this time, this coalition was already fractured, with different groups more focused on expanding their own influence rather than taking down Dongzhuo, as the goal was clearly set too high from the onset, and the early string of defeats crushed the coalition's spirit. And with Dongzhuo safely situated in Chang'an now, the coalition was essentially over. And to make matters worse, Sun Jian would also recover the Imperial Jade Seal in the ruins of the capital. Now, unlike what was written in the Romance of Three Kingdoms, the only people who knew about this discovery was Sun Jian, many of his officers, his wife, and of course his boss, Yuan Shu, who had many loyal men within Sun Jian's army, so it was going to be impossible to keep this secret away from him. And Sun Jian also didn't make a run for it after finding the seal, as he did try to keep it for himself, but after Yuan Shu found out, Yuan Shu simply invited Lady Wu over to his camp as hostage and demanded for the seal. And Sun Jian soon obliged, so historically, very early on, Yuan Shu got the seal. But we also know historically that Sun Jian did eventually go south and die at the hands of Liu Biao. So what gives? Well, the reason for Sun Jian's attack on Liu Biao is once again due to Yuan Shu's command, as after all, please reinforce this idea that Sun Jian was not an independent warlord at this time, but rather just a general serving in Yuan Shu's army. So now the question turns to, why is Yuan Shu attacking Liu Biao? Well, it has to come down to the sibling rivalries that's now fomenting between Yuan Shu and his older brother Yuan Shao. Just as Yuan Shu was collecting this imperial seal, Yuan Shao also had in his possession another imperial seal, as there were roughly 6 imperial seals in total. But unlike Yuan Shu, who was now daydreaming of the mandate of heaven for himself, Yuan Shao was much more practical, as he knew that defeating Dongzhuo and rescuing the emperor was definitely out of reach. But if Dongzhuo continued to retain control of the emperor, and thus the imperial court, then the coalition risked going down in history as a group of rebels. So since they can't save the emperor, their only hope is to set up a new emperor by declaring the current child emperor illegitimate. And from all the princes at this time, Liu Yu was extremely popular among the gentry clan and happened to reside in the north, where Yuan Shao had influence. So Yuan Shao formed a new plan where he wanted to use the seal that he had to prop up Liu Yu as an alternative emperor in order to delegitimize Dongzhuo's reign. But unfortunately, this plan ran into three major obstacles. First, Liu Yu himself refused. As a faithful prince to the Han, accepting Yuan Shao's offer was akin to treason. So Liu Yu straight up refused. He had no incentive to become this emperor. He was already a prince, and if he chose this path, then he risked going down in history as a traitor himself. Whereas if he stays a prince, he'll always be a prince. Secondly, Yuan Shu, Yuan Shao's own brother or cousin, also refused. As a fellow clan member, Yuan Shao had expected Yuan Shu's support, but after exchange of letters, Yuan Shao discovered that his brother now had bigger ambitions in the Central Plain and still held the same childhood grudge against him. Lastly, the coalition that he was using was now over. Liu Dai had already killed Qiao Mao in a land dispute among coalition members. The Black Mountain Bandits and the southern Xiongnu tribes was now plaguing the north, while the Yellow Turbans was resurging in massive numbers in the Qing and Yun provinces. So even if he wanted to use the coalition was already fractured and busy heading home to take care of their own messes as these rebel forces from various groups was now plaguing the land. And add on the fact that Dongzhuo seems content to grow fat and old out west, Yuan Shao now had to grow his own forces. So now, with the entire east up for grab, we'll end our episode here, as this sibling rivalry between the Yuan brothers is just starting to boil over, as the turning point of not supporting Liu Yu would split these brothers for good and divide the coalition into two camps. And we'll see these two camps go to battle with each other in the next episode. So hopefully you all enjoyed this one, and I'll see you all next time. Bye!